manifested my family to move 1,000 miles across the country to be nearer to me. I did this using the exact same method I used to manifest everything else. I felt into the reality of it already being true, and I didn't drown it out with too much contradiction and doubt. When I say I felt into it, I just mean I captured the sense of reality of it having already manifested, and I did this for only a moment. Here's how it happened. I had recently moved to Pennsylvania, after having spent some time living in New York City and in the South. I loved where I live and, for the most part, enjoy being alone. But as I was taking a walk through my neighborhood one evening, I was feeling quite lonely. I started to wish that my family lived nearer to me. I have a sister and 2 nephews that I adore, and my mother and I are very close as well. So as I was walking, I decided to manifest my family moving to Pennsylvania. I didn't stop my walk, and I don't think I even closed my eyes, but I just briefly imagined, and felt into the reality where I am reflecting back on the idea that I successfully manifested my family to move up here, and how crazy it is that it actually happened. Then, I just kept strolling through my neighborhood. This was in June a few years ago. I don't know if the idea of them moving really came to mind much again, because I didn't really have that super lonely mood again that made me think of it in the first place. Sometime after this, my sister and her husband decided to sell the huge house they had just built 2 years earlier, and build a different house on a piece of property they were looking at to buy, which was just a couple of miles from the house they were already living in. No, there was nothing wrong with the house they had built. My sister is just a shopaholic, and that includes houses. She changes houses as often as she changes hair color, not gonna lie. My sister sent me a couple of house plans for these gorgeous homes she was trying to decide between, and they were about to sign the contract for the land. I never thought of this in terms of failure of my intended manifestation in June, and I wasn't so committed to it actually manifesting anymore because I was pretty content with my life as it was. I was able to visit my family pretty often, so no big deal. I do think that if I seriously thought that I could actually manifest it, that I would have committed to it more, but the combination of not needing it so much and thinking it might be too big a thing to actually manifest, I just didn't follow through, and instead was going with the flow of them building this new house down south. It is now October, and I received a text from my sister that was a listing for a house near me in Pennsylvania. I texted her back and said, "For me?" I assumed she was showing me a cool house for sale that she wanted me to buy. She texted back and said, "No, for me." Of course I called her that very moment to see what the heck she was talking about. She said that the contract for the property didn't work out for whatever reason. She told me, but I didn't understand what it meant, despite the fact that I was briefly a lawyer. She also said that her husband has a job offer from a company in Ohio, and he would be able to live anywhere in the vicinity of Kentucky, Pennsylvania, Ohio, or Virginia, as he wouldn't need to go to an office but would work from home and travel a lot. They decided if he gets the job, they would rather live near to me rather than where they don't know anyone. So this brought my imaginal act of the previous June back to mind, and I realized that what I was seeing was its unfolding into physical reality. Thank goodness that contract had fallen through. And thank goodness this job offer came before they decided to contract for another. At this point, this was not a complete manifestation. Not only did her husband have to determine whether or not this job was going to be better than his current job, but he had to actually be hired. And still yet, they had to actually buy a house here. So at this point, I committed fully to the manifestation. I wasn't going to let it get this far and then start wobbling and doubting and let it fail. I kept remembering the words, "It is accomplished fact, destined to be realized." I think Neville Goddard said that, but I can't remember for sure. Whenever I would wonder if it was going to happen, I would remind myself that I am manifesting it, and so wondering is not the appropriate mental act. Instead, I would remind myself, it is accomplished fact destined to be realized. And finally, it did happen. They bought a really interesting 1880s farmhouse not far from Gettysburg, and I was able to hang out with my family literally every week. Oh, and I forgot this cool part. My mother would spend a couple of months at a time at my sister's house so she could help with the kids. It was so perfect. My mother and I would go for hikes quite often. It was so fun. You might notice my use of past tense. After living here a couple of years, my sister decided she really wanted to live near a lake. When I arrived at her house one day, she said, "I have some news. We are wanting to move to a place in Kentucky, and please don't manifest us to stay because I really want to live on this lake." I couldn't help but laugh at her request that I not manifest her to stay. She showed me the place and it actually looked quite cool, and I realized it is a place I would really like to visit. Also, it was much closer to where my mother lived, so she would be able to spend more time at her own home, which she had expressed she desired. It was close enough that my mother could drive back and forth to see the kids rather than having to fly. I did prefer to have them nearby, but I felt selfish making everything so much more difficult for my mother. And as it turns out, I really love where they live and love visiting. So I let them go and didn't work my magic for selfish reasons. So what did I do to manifest my family moving to Pennsylvania? I felt into the reality where I had already successfully manifested it. When I began seeing the possibility of it actually happening, I did not wonder if it was going to work. I decided it was going to work. I decided it was accomplished fact and therefore must manifest. I learned from this that no manifestation is too big. Imaginal acts create. Whatsoever you desire to experience in physical reality, imagine that it has already happened and let that imaginal act anchor you into the certainty of it. Remind yourself, I saw it with my inner senses and I have claimed it as mine, so it must, by infallible law, manifest into my physical reality. Don't wonder, don't waver, decide.